Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the City of Cape Coral Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Today is Wednesday, January 5th, 2022. We'll have a moment of silence and then we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Chair. Before I call the roll, I would like to announce that Commissioner Benny has requested to be excused, and I will mark him so.
Thank you.
Apking?
Here.
Marker?
Here.
O'Connor?
Here.
Reed?
Here.
Safranek?
Here.
Summers?
Here.
Fioretti?
Here.
York? Here. 8 present, 1 excused.
Let's see, we'll review our minutes from December 1st, 2021. Is there any discussion or motions? Can I get a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Commissioner O'Connor, second by Commissioner Summers. Madam City Clerk, please call the vote.
Yes, Chair. Apking?
Yay.
Marker?
Abstain.
You can still vote because it's just a ministerial act, but
You could have read it.
Okay, you don't have to be here for that. I did read it, and aye.
Okay, so aye. Thank you. O'Connor?
aye.
Reed?
Aye.
Safranek?
Aye.
Summers?
Aye.
Fioretti?
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. The City Attorney, please call Ordinance 20-22.
Actually, it's 2-22.
2-22,
but that's okay.
sorry.
You know, it's early. It's the first meeting back.
I'm
you know.
still in this year, right?
An ordinance amending the City of Cape Coral Comprehensive Plan by amending the future land use map from single-family to commercial professional land use for property described as lots 5 through 25, Block 3048, Cape Coral, Unit 62. Property is located at 242 through 420 Southwest 24th Street, providing severability and an effective date.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Chad Boyko, Principal Planner with the City's Planning Division. This is Ordinance 2-22. This is a privately initiated future land use request. The applicant is Don Hinks. The size of the site is 2.71 acres, and it is located near the intersection of Veterans Parkway and Santa Barbara Boulevard. It's within the transition area of our urban services designation, which means that the site either has utilities or is planned for utilities. And that site there is utilities that is there. It just has the designation has not been switched over to infill. And then the applicant's request is a future land use map amendment from single-family residential to commercial professional. Here's a couple of maps for you. The one on your left is an aerial map of the site. It's a collection of parcels. They're all undeveloped. They are north of a canal, Defender Canal, which is to the south. Surrounding development includes single-family residential parcels to the north and to the west. To the south, you have that canal and then undeveloped land. And then to the west, you have the outer edge of that Lowe's Publix Target shopping center. The zoning map of the property, all of the parcels in question are zoned single-family residential. To the north and to the west, you also have single-family residential zoning. To the south, across the canal, you have commercial zoning, and also to the west, that similar zoning is reenacted. Current future land use is a single-family. It kind of follows a similar pattern as a zoning map. Northwest is you have single-family residential land use. South, you have commercial professional land use, and to the east, you have commercial professional as well. And then, as indicated in the map on the right, the proposed future land use is commercial professional. Some findings of fact: the site is 11 undeveloped parcels that are under common ownership. The parcels have been residential since the adoption of the comprehensive plan in 1989. The owner of the site, of the 11 parcels in question, is also the owner of that area to the south that is across the Defender Canal. That's owned by Don Hinks as well. The applicant has also filed for a vacation of right-of-way for the Defender Canal, which if that right-of-way vacation is approved, it would create an assemblage. You could vacate that canal, and then you would have depth and assemblage throughout that site. So you can kind of see why the application has been filed for that commercial professional future land use designation. You would then have a group of parcels at that site. The total site of that, the total acreage out of that assemblage would be around 25 acres or so. We conducted our analysis for the comprehensive plan, policy 1.13. Staff finds that the site, that policy 1.13 is the commercial node policy. Staff finds that the site is 2,000 feet west of the Veterans Parkway and Santa Barbara Boulevard intersection, which is a commercial node. That's an intersection of 2 or more 4-lane streets. The commercial professional future land use designation is at that direct intersection of those 2 roads, and that CP land use does extend outward west and north from that intersection along Veterans Parkway, where you have the Lowe's Publix Target shopping center. It also extends north, which isn't a question for this one. And staff finds that because this site would be an extension of that commercial node, you do have some commercial node characteristics on this site, because you would have a collection of parcels that where the CP land use moves westward from that intersection. The next policy we looked at is policy 1.14, which is the commercial siting guidelines. We have 8 of those, which helps staff to determine whether or not a site is a good fit for commercial professional land use or not. When we looked at this, staff finds that the site is consistent with 4 of the guidelines. Compactness, you have parcels that are relatively square or rectangular in shape. Major intersection, which also relates back to that commercial node criteria that we just discussed. Integration, staff finds that if this was designated as commercial professional, you would have some integration with the site to the south because you have common ownership there. And then lastly, following that same vein, is the ownership pattern, where you have 11 parcels that are owned with the same owner as the area to the south. Staff finds that the site is partially consistent with 2 of the guidelines, which is adequate depth and assembly. Staff finds that even though the parcels themselves are lacking that 250 feet of depth, staff finds that you would have, if that right-of-way vacation for the canal was approved, you would have 1 large parcel that would have that adequate depth. So we found that it's partially consistent based on some future actions being approved by City Council. And then lastly, the assembly component. The site itself does not have the required 3 acres that we're looking for with an assembly, but you do have some potential for assembly with the parcels to the south. So we find that it's partially consistent with those 2 guidelines. And then we also found that the site is not consistent with 2 guidelines, intrusion and access. The intrusion one being that you do have some single-family residences that are well established to the north and to the west, so you would have some potential intrusion to those areas. It's partially mitigated by the fact that if this is developed with the area to the south, it's likely to be the rear of a development and not the front, as most commercial developers aren't going to locate a commercial development with their main access point off of a local road. So you would have this being sort of like either the delivery area or the rear of the building, where there'd be some buffering and some landscaping and things like that. And then lastly, the access guideline is not met by this. Access criteria means that the site either has direct access from access to a city parking lot, or that it's located on a roadway with a access management plan by the city or Lee County. It does not have either of those, so it's not consistent with those 2 guidelines. And lastly, this policy does not state that a certain number of guidelines must be met for the commercial land use designation. Staff looked at the Economic Development Master Plan. Staff finds that the amendment is neither supported or in conflict with the master plan. The site is not an economic opportunity area as identified by that plan, and that this amendment will not also result in large-scale multifamily development. So our recommendation based upon that analysis is approval of Ordinance 2-22, and we have not received any correspondence to date on this hearing. Thanks.
Thank you, Chad. Is the applicant for the representative available? Good morning.
Morning. Happy New Year, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Linda Miller, Vice President of Avalon Engineering, representing the property owner Donald Hinks on this land use map amendment. I'd like to thank Chad this morning on his presentation. I totally agree with his analysis. We do think that the lots should be incorporated with the commercial lots to the south. We also think that this will provide a better buffer area from the residents to the north and the one to the east of the site, west of the site. As Chad mentioned, that these lots are owned by the same owner as the lots to the south and that have CP land use. And when combined together, as Chad mentioned, it will be 25 acres. Stand by to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. This is a public hearing. Does anyone from the public wish to speak on this matter? Please come forward. State your name, your address. That one, yeah, that's fine.
Good morning. My name is Charles Brown. I live within the 500 feet area. Pardon me. I live within the 500 feet affected area. I was just curious. I didn't read, and I didn't. It didn't specify that they're trying to convert this area to commercial. That was clear in the notes that I read. I just wanted to bring to the attention, there's a lot to the north that Lowe's uses for retention. There's 2 lots on 23rd Terrace. One is it's probably roughly an acre, and the other one's a 1/4 acre. They use that for retention, and they planted trees around it. And I was hoping that they could, if it does get approved, that they could do something along those lines with this property and use that property for the water retainage versus using it, actually developing on it. I didn't know where to voice those concerns to. But
Our ordinances call for buffering to residential, so the residential is across the street.
Correct.
You will see buffering with landscaping.
okay, do you have
Approval is,
yeah, because I just to have a semi, depending on if they abandon the canal or whatever, and then have a semi come in. I just didn't know if there was actual guidelines that were in place for that to address those, being directly across the street. Even like when they did the Sam's Club and stuff, there's the retention ponds are along that back road there to kind of give a little bit of a buffer.
Chad Boyko, planning staff. There's a couple of there's a couple of requirements for this that would help that. First, we mentioned in the presentation that typical commercial development's not going to put their building towards that residential area. It's probably going to be aimed towards Veterans Parkway, which has the high visibility. There are landscaping buffering requirements. I want to say, since it's single-family residential across a 2-lane street, you're probably looking at either 20 feet with a pretty thick landscape buffer there, or 10 feet with a wall on the back of the property.
Yeah, and the wall would be similar to what they have behind the Lowe's.
Correct.
So
Yeah, and
20-foot wall.
that's just there may be some some differences there, but you'll have pretty thick landscaping. A lot of times they do put the surface water retention in the rear of the development because they don't that's their sort of not needed space. But there are some requirements where you're not going to see like heavy commercial development on this strip of lots that's in question today.
Okay. One other question, it'd probably be best for you. How long typically does this process take before they get to a point where they would be applying for a building permit? I guess there's a lot of zoning changes that would have to happen.
So if this is approved, I want to say this goes to City Council hearing in February for final approval. Then they would have to do a zoning change on this, which would take a few months. And then after that zoning approval is done, say middle to the end of this year, then they could come in with a site plan which lays out how the building or buildings would be constructed, and then they would come in with the building permit right around that area.
So roughly a year.
I mean, if that's like pie in the sky kind of timeline, that it would be the end of the year. That's even saying that they have a development plan in place for this. This may just be getting all their ducks in a row, so that if someone comes in with a final development plan, then they could do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
this is a public hearing. Does anyone else from the public wish to speak? Seeing none, back to the commission. Commissioners? Commissioner Fioretti?
Just to clarify, if the canal is vacated, does that mean that they intend to fill it and the properties would then be connected physically?
More than likely. I mean, it doesn't, the canal vacation doesn't necessitate that they fill it in, but that would seem the most likely path forward for this.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? A motion?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion by Commissioner Marker and a second by Commissioner Summers, and the motion is for approval. Correct?
Correct.
Motion is for approval. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the vote?
Yes, Chair. Apking,
Aye.
Marker,
Aye.
O'Connor,
Aye.
Reed,
Aye.
Safranik,
Aye.
Summers. Aye. Fioretti.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
On Ordinance 6-22, I'll be passing the gavel to Vice Chair Marker. I have a conflict on this one, and I have filled out the Form 8B, so I won't be voting.
Ordinance 6-22, an ordinance amending the City of Cape Coral Comprehensive Plan by amending the future land use map from Pine Island Road District to multifamily residential land use for property described as lots 1 through 30, Block 2378, Unit 35, Cape Coral subdivision. The property is located at 550 through 716 Northeast 4th Terrace, providing severability and an effective date.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. Once again, Chad Boyko, Principal Planner with the City's Planning Division. This is Ordinance 6-22. This is a privately initiated small-scale future land use map amendment. There are multiple owners for this property, as we'll get into later. The applicant for this is Big Marlin Properties, LLC. There's also multiple addresses along Northeast 4th Terrace. The size of the site is a little over 3.5 acres. It's within the transition area of our urban services boundary, which means that utilities are either available or are being planned for construction within the next 2 to 3 years. And then the applicant's request is a future land use map amendment from Pine Island Road District, PIRD, to multifamily residential, or MF. Here's an aerial map of the site. You can see that it's a collection of mostly undeveloped properties. It's one block within Northeast Cape Coral. Development to the north, south, and west is residential and scattered vacant lots. There is undeveloped non-residential land to the east. As we mentioned, utilities are either available or will be available within the near future. And then the applicant has indicated that the future land use map amendment would be to build multifamily on the site. Staff does want to note that you do have a large undeveloped parcel to the south that has the PIRD designation. And then also to the southeast, you have the Golden Corral Banquet Restaurant. The current future land use, as indicated by the map on the left, is Pine Island Road District. Similar land use exists to the south, to the east, and to the west. To the north, across a street, you have single-family residential land use and one parcel of public facilities land use. The proposed future land use, as indicated on the map on the right, is the multifamily residential future land use designation. Findings of fact, we mentioned earlier that the site is 14 parcels. All of those are undeveloped except for one multifamily structure. The applicant does not own the entire block, but several property owners have joined this application to reach that minimum 51% threshold. Staff finds that the site is north of an assemblage with frontage on Pine Island Road. This is part of the North 2 UEP area, which has either been under construction or will be under construction within the near future. And then staff notes that within this site of 14 parcels, the applicant owns 4 parcels per our research with the Lee County Property Appraiser. There is also another owner that owns 3 parcels that are adjacent to each other within this site. So the first thing that we looked at with this, we looked at the 2 future land use designations that are either on this site or are proposed. The first is the existing Pine Island Road future land use designation. There is one zoning district that is compatible currently with this. That's the commercial corridor. This site does not have that commercial corridor zoning district. It has single-family residential zoning still on it. If this were to be developed with the PIRD designation, then that zoning district would have to be changed to the commercial corridor. The Pineland Road District allows for a maximum floor area ratio of 1.25, which means that it could be developed with a little above the total size of the site. If the site were assembled, and this is kind of a tricky analysis in terms of what could be developed there, but if the site was assembled together at that FAR of 1.25, you could have approximately just under 200,000 square feet of commercial development. The site isn't assembled, and traditional development patterns are much, much less than that 1.25. You'd be looking at probably a 0.25 if this site were to be developed according to how Cape Coral has normally been developed with commercial land. So you would have a maximum square footage that is much less than that if the site were assembled into those 14 lots all into one parcel. The next we looked at is the proposed multifamily residential future land designation. Within this designation, there is a maximum density of 25 multifamily dwelling units per acre allowed. There are 2 zoning districts that are compatible with the MF designation. You have the RML and the RMM. The RML is it allows for single family, duplex, and multifamily development, and it can be developed on any size site. The RMM only allows for multifamily development of 3 units or more. It does not allow for single family homes or for duplexes. The caveat to the RMM district is that you have to have a minimum 1 acre of size for this to be developed. So once again, that provides some sort of tricky analysis in terms of looking at worst case scenario, what could be developed there. If the site were assembled into one parcel, you would be looking at about 88 dwelling units. But since you have some fragmented ownership, you don't have a lot of assemblage going on in there, you would be looking at probably RML for this unless you had the assemblage occur. Staff notes that on 10,000 square foot parcels, which there are a few of those scattered throughout this site, you're only limited to either duplexes or single family. You have to have a minimum of 15,000 square feet in order to develop multifamily there. So that's just some points on what could be developed on this site with the multifamily future land use designation. And once again, we note that the site is still zoned single family residential. So if there was going to be any multifamily development to occur on the site, you would need a rezone to either the RML or the RMM district. So the next policy we looked at within our comprehensive plan is policy 1.13, which is the commercial node criteria. We discussed this in the last amendment. The site is not at a direct intersection of arterial collector roads. The nearest commercial node is the Pine Island Road and Santa Barbara Boulevard intersection. Staff does note that the site is a little bit closer to the intersection of Andalusia Boulevard and Pine Island Road. However, since Andalusia Boulevard does not go south past Pine Island Road, we excluded that from this analysis and we instead use the Santa Barbara Boulevard and Pine Island Road intersection as that commercial node. It's not at that direct intersection. It is adjacent to a parcel, Pine Island Road parcel, with frontage along Pine Island Road. And because the Pine Island Road district designation extends outward from that commercial node of Santa Barbara Boulevard and Pine Island Road, staff finds that the site, and it extends to the site and even past this, the PIRD designation extends pretty much the length of Pine Island Road. Because you have that extension of that designation coming from that intersection, staff does find that this site is located at a commercial node. The next policy we looked at is the 8 commercial siting guidelines. Staff finds that the site meets 3 of those guidelines: the major intersection, which relates back to the commercial node criteria that we just discussed; compactness, these sites are a collection of 14 parcels that are either relatively square or rectangular; and then it also meets the integration component, meaning that you would have potential integrated development with the area to the south. You also have that PIR designation to the east and to the west that could also be integrated with this. Staff finds that the site partially meets 3 guidelines. Ownership pattern, while there is not an assemblage of 3 or more acres within this site, staff does note that you do have some common ownership sprinkling up throughout the site. About half, we mentioned there's 4 parcels that share common ownership, and then 3 that also share common ownership. So there is some potential for some ownership pattern linking up to form a little bit of an assemblage there. It partially meets the intrusion guideline. There are some single-family residences that are located towards the north. However, staff finds that most of if this was assembled or perhaps integrated with the area to the south, this would probably be the rear of any commercial development that is occurring out there. And then lastly, the assemblage guideline mentioned earlier you do have some sprinkling of assemblage that is occurring throughout these 14 parcels. Staff finds that the site does not meet 2 of the guidelines, which is adequate depth. These parcels do not have the adequate depth of 250 feet that we look at within the comprehensive plan. And then the access criteria also does not meet. You don't have access to a city parking lot, and you do not have frontage on a roadway that has an access management plan. So it does not meet those 2 guidelines. And once again, policy 1.14 does not require or mandate a certain number of these guidelines being met for staff to recommend approval or denial of a future land use map amendment. The next policy we looked at is policy 1.7, which is our multifamily siting criteria, which we have adopted within the past couple of years to give us a better idea of where multifamily residential development may be well suited. Staff finds that the site is consistent with 3 of the guidelines, which is proximity to major roadways. The requirement for this is that multifamily development is well suited if it's within a quarter mile of a arterial or collector roadway. These sites do fall within that quarter mile radius. The second guideline is the proximity to non-residential land uses. We've discussed, we've already got the PIRD designation to the south, the east, and to the west, so it does meet that guideline. And then lastly, the transition from commercial uses to non-residential uses. If this was to be amended to multifamily, this would provide a transitioning from the PIRD parcel to the south to the single-family parcels that are located to the north. And then lastly, staff finds that the site is partially consistent with 1 guideline, which is assemblage opportunities. There is that commercial parcel that is to the south. PIRD does allow for multifamily development. So if this site was assembled with the site to the south, you could still also have multifamily opportunities that is available in that area. Similar to our commercial siting guidelines, the multifamily siting criteria does not state that a site must meet a certain number of guidelines for us to recommend approval or denial. And then lastly, this is our own analysis of whether it's appropriate for Pineland Road District or multifamily future land use. Staff finds that the characteristics of this site that make it viable for the PIRD land use also make it attractive for that multifamily land use as well. You have adjacent, the parcels are adjacent to a larger commercial parcel that has frontage on Pine Island Road. You do have potential for assemblage down the road. And then the surrounding land uses to the east and to the west, you're looking at, you do already have some commercial uses that are available and developed within this site. Staff notes that commercial development and multifamily development are both needed within the city of Cape Coral. We have done studies on both commercial and multifamily. They're both needed. With commercial land, we're still running at that deficit, which we're always trying to combat in whatever way we can. And then we also have 2 multifamily reports that state we do need additional multifamily units within the city of Cape Coral as well. Staff has long sought to designate and retain commercial land wherever appropriate and suitable. Staff notes that when we looked at the traffic and the water usage and the solid waste components, the neighborhood impacts are relatively similar in those aspects. Because you would be looking at a relatively small commercial site by themselves, you wouldn't have a lot of traffic being generated by these parcels. It might be a little bit different if this site is assembled to the south, even though you probably wouldn't have a lot of traffic on that local road to the north generated from a commercial development here. The water and the sewer, it's relatively negated by the fact that you're looking at a small, either multifamily or commercial on the site alone. And staff, when we looked at it, we just found that retaining the Pineland Road designation and that potential down the road for assemblage with that parcel to the south is more valuable than having some scattered duplexes or single-family homes within this site. When we look at the multifamily rental study that we have conducted over the 2 times in the past 5 years or so, when they're looking at that for reducing the multifamily requirement that we have, they're looking at larger multifamily components. With this site, you've got, it's a little over 3.5 acres. It doesn't look that it would likely be a large-scale multifamily development, so we didn't really look at this amendment as reducing that multifamily need that we have within the city. So staff finds, with our recommendation, that the Pineland Road District is more compatible and is better suited for the city's long-term needs than the multifamily future land use designation. We have not received any correspondence either in opposition or approval of this. We did receive 1 phone call where they're just kind of looking to see what was going on with this. I'm here for any further questions.
Is the applicant or representative, president wanting to speak?
Let's load mine up too.
Yeah, I think I left it open for you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Already. Good morning. For the record, Tom Slaughter, and I'm with Cape Land. We had an opportunity to go through the staff report. There's a number of areas that we simply disagree with. And I say that in good faith because oftentimes when we look at land use cases, I remember a friend using an analogy, a jump ball, a 50-50 challenge. He was a sports nut, but he also used the rejection to imply when you didn't have a chance. And then he also used a slam dunk when he thought it was pretty routine. This is a dead ball foul. And let me explain what that means. When we go through this site, these 14 properties, there's 14 properties. We started with 8 properties as part of the application. We picked up one additional lot. And it was a City of Cape Coral owned lot that the property owner did a trade with. And as part of that trade, they were very transparent in what the reasoning for that was. So we've assembled now 9 lots as part of the application, but they are not assembled in any shape or form as in those different property owners have agreed to come together and work a deal. And the reason I say that is staff put together a staff report that talks a lot about that potential that's there if, and a big if they are assembled. So what I want to do today is walk you through what exactly we've done. In going through the surrounding area, I think Chad's done a very good job of walking you through kind of the lay of the land, so I don't need to repeat that. But when we look at this property, when this was originally platted, this property was platted as 80 by 125 lots. That tells me as a land use planner, and I've worked in 3 platted lot community, the original intent was residential, simply because your commercial industrial lots are often skinnier, and you assemble many of them, but they're deeper. So this doesn't look like a commercial or industrial lot. More importantly, on the very last change, and this is, I think, the problem we have with the staff report is it hasn't done you any favors as a decision-making body. Under a legislative role, you get to basically open up the code and start looking at the what-ifs and this and that, and you get to help make those decisions. You provide a recommendation to City Council to do that. But in you reading the staff report, I had trouble actually seeing where the big problem was that we know of and that we've known about since 2019, and that is the R1 residential single-family zoning does not in any shape or form is consistent or compatible with the Pine Island Residential District. Well, what does that mean? Well, when we go through our landing framework, policy 115 of our code talks about a table 1, and it identifies those appropriate land uses and those appropriate zonings that would help implement it. So in this particular regards, our existing situation is we have a future land use district, the Pine Island Road District, and it's again for all 14 lots, even though they are not assembled, but we have a zoning of R1. What that means is today, if I walk in and I take one of Bob's 80 by 125 lots and I apply for a commercial, I will be denied because I do not have the zoning. Now, if I come in with that same 80 by 125 lot and I apply for a residential single family because I have the R1 zoning, I would be denied because I don't have a consistent land use. So that aspect is not being addressed by staff, and that's unfortunate. Now, one of the things the applicants are seeking to do is to fix that. Fix it by taking a look at what are appropriate land uses, what are appropriate zoning, and then in doing so, we filed application for a plan amendment. As staff indicated, we're looking at multifamily residential. There's 2 zoning districts, the low and the medium. And in this particular regards, we just don't believe that there's an intensity of use that you'd have the highest level residential in the city. But additionally, when we think of a planning framework, in a perfect world, we do three things and we do them well. We connect the dots, we make sure our wires are not crossed, and that means we adopt a comprehensive plan, and with that, the future land use map. As amended, this is not written into stone. A progressive community will often reevaluate and amend their comprehensive plan as needed. The second thing you do is you establish a zoning code and a zoning map to implement that. And that's what that table 1 was about. Third area is you drill down is once you're a point, and I think Chad answered that in the last question, was process from plan amendment to rezoning to then site development, we're into the LDRs. So in an ideal world, all of those things are working together and in unison. But right now, the R1 zoning, as I indicated, does not implement that. When we look at our planning framework, it's broken. It's broken in that you may recall that this petition probably should have been brought to you about 3 months ago, but we had a private property rights land use amendment that went through that held all other petitions until that was done. But right now, as we speak, these 14 property owners are denied all expected uses of their land. Additionally, they're unable to apply for any type of single-family permit or commercial permit till it's resolved. And we believe that this plan amendment and then subsequent rezoning will be a corrective cure. It will help fix this problem. In going through the request, I used the phrase earlier about jump ball, and you know what? These first 5 criteria, that's what that is. That's where reasonable men and women can agree to disagree, but people can have that discussion and debate. Criteria 6, that is your dead ball foul. That's the one where you go hold it. But could there be an instance that something's come up where we've identified a problem, and now we realize that in a perfect world, this decision doesn't meet this criteria. This decision is essentially a decision where there are very few good decisions to be made, and you simply got to acknowledge that and fix it. So we believe that, again, this is a legislative decision and that the commission can weigh in and provide direction to council on what do you believe is the best fix. In going through the affected parties, the interesting thing is I've spoken to most of them that have been part of this and gotten different perspectives. And right now, they have a reasonable use to use their property. And staff spoke previously, as well as in the staff report, they talked about to the south, that larger property, I think it's owned by an auto dealership, is that their use of the property, that their entitlement is secure. They have a commercial land use and a commercial zoning. Likewise, the residential across the street to the north, they have a residential land use and a residential R1 single-family zoning. They're whole. These 14 properties are not whole. And they have made financially backed expectations. They have bought property. They have paid taxes. They have paid for their water and sewer assessment. So when you think about a readiness to serve, right now, under the current regulatory scheme being broken, they're denied that opportunity. In terms of how this issue first came to my attention, number 3 was, I'm also a realtor with land brokers here in Cape Coral. And we represented a property owner who owned 3 of the lots, and they were unable to sell it. Why? Because at closing, the title, well, the cloudiness to how the regulatory scheme was even understood was just so problematic that potential buyers just simply left the agreement. Why? Because at the simplest, is this commercial or is this single family? Which is it? When we look at it, and I spoke to a number of people, and this is where my concern is in terms of some of the real harm is, there are people that I've spoke to who, one individual who's not part of this petition, but assured me, Tom, and I know this individual, said, I don't have an objection to your proposal, but I'm going to leave it to my kids and they'll build a house on it because, and she's a savvy lady, she had the zoning code and the zoning map right in front of her. She said, it's R1, it's single family zoning. At a minimum, that's what I get to do with the property, at a minimum. But we know that in fact is not true now. Additionally, Bertha Gonzalez is here. She is the owner of 636 Northeast 4th. In speaking with her, again, that whole anxiety and concern of the cloud that hangs over them is her ability to get permitting, her ability to potentially go refinancing, property insurance, including real estate activities, again, is hampered by this unknown of what are my entitlements, what are my rights. The property owners in this particular regards have essentially established that they would prefer a multifamily land use. Now, in going through this, essentially there's three decisions the city can make. Force the issue, you have a Pine Island Road District, and the commercial quarter is the zoning for that. But as Mr. Boyko presented, the problem with that is the 8 criteria that list, if you were today, you have that residential single family zoning, but if you were today contemplate, hey, I want to go to take this from residential to commercial, a petition you just saw in the last round, the first question you would ask is, well, how do you meet those criteria? How do you satisfy those criteria for how we would approve it or deny it? And as Chad indicated, there's no magic number that if you get to a certain point, you get it, and if you don't hit that point, you fail. So in this regards, he talked about policy 114, and this has to do with commercial siting. So let's assume single-family residential, we wanted to take a commercial today. He told you that of the 8 criteria, it only met 3 of them. 3 of them he talked about being partial, consistent, partial, meaning you split the baby. But in that regards, the big ifs were, if you are able to assemble it, if you get a common ownership. And I'm here to tell you, we were unsuccessful in doing that. We reached out to the property owner of the larger parcel. They were not interested. We also, amongst the 14, talked to each and every one when possible, but we were not even able to communicate or contact a couple of them simply because they're out of the country. So email, telephone call, snail mail, we tried all things. So this idea that staff has, it sounds nice, go assemble them, then bring it in, we weren't able to. And why is that? Because private property rights. People have a right to participate or not. They have a right to own their property free and clear. And from the city's perspective, I know and I understand in a platted land community how difficult it can be, but they don't have the business to be in the arranged marriage where they can start forcing issues. Because if you know anything about real estate, if you knew that the city's position was that and you were the neighboring property owner, you just drove the price of these folks down considerably with that. Now, in going through this particular site, we believe that it's broken because, as I've indicated, the land use and the zoning don't mix. And we not only believe that, but the city, at the last meeting last month, there was a discussion back and forth over, do we want commercial? Do we want multifamily? As Tom indicated, are the criteria almost directing you to have a fight over the same land for 2 different things? And I would argue that I don't believe it's one or the other. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same times, but it means we've got to pick our fights. We've got to be smart. As Chad indicated, most of the big tracts of land have been identified. It's these smaller edge areas that you're seeing development at. And in this regards, 2 years ago, the city put out a plan, thought, well, we'd grow about 5,300 a year. Well, we actually were, in a 2-year period, we surpassed that significantly. So we're already past that number, and we haven't hit the 3rd year. But in doing so, the very last bullet talks about needing additional rental apartments at 1,862 units per year. And staff told you last meeting, no, we will not hit those numbers at all. So the question becomes, do you believe this is a policy guide? If so, we need to acknowledge that. If not, you need to kill this document, because right now, you're demonstrating in the community essentially inconsistent standards, inconsistent approaches to how we're going to resolve some of these matters. But don't take my word for it. Additionally, the newspaper, every year, they put out an opinion for what's going to happen for the next year, what the big issues are. And I thought about, considering all the terrible, no good things we've gone through this past year or two, I was somewhat surprised that the number one issue the newspaper picked up on was housing. And you can dismiss it, but other people are acknowledging that is a problem for Cape Coral. It's a problem not just in our economic development, but it's a problem also for basic socioeconomic. In going through the findings, as I've indicated, staff has kind of approached it as though, quote, this is a jump ball. Reasonable people can disagree. We believe that is not the case. But in doing so, we believe that through the findings that if Planning Commission supports this through a recommendation of approval of the council, that it'll correct that city-imposed regulatory deficiency. It'll establish compatibility of amongst our land uses. Additionally, the future land use and the zoning will then come into compliance. And then lastly, that we're consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies. We believe that, again, that this project will not generate unplanned impacts, but more importantly, these people have paid for water and sewer services. They're not able to use their property consistent with law. That's a problem. In doing so, I've provided a recommended motion that if there's support of this amendment, first, that the approval of the proposed small-scale future land use amendment by a finding of the Cape Coral Planning and Zoning Commission, that petition LU 210010 is consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan and supporting goals, objectives, and policies. Secondly, that the proposed petition is also compliance with zoning and other land development code standards in regards to consistency and compatibility. And lastly, that the approval will cure a significant material defect in the city's planning and regulatory framework and mitigate those existing harms to potential property owners. With that, I'm available for any questions now or after public input.
This is a public hearing. Do any members of the public wish to speak? If so, please go to the podium next to the door, state your name and address for the record.
Good morning. My name is Robert Moore. I have an interest in the property at 604 Northeast 4th Terrace as part of this application. I live at 8766 Dartmouth Street in Fort Myers. I just simply want to say that the conflict between the zoning and the land use makes my property absolutely unbuildable. There's no permit that I can get issued. So I believe that this body and the council should provide some relief in some way or another. I also think that staff's thinking pie in the sky if they're thinking that we, the owners of these lots that are conflicted, should sit back and wait for the larger parcel owner to try to buy us. I don't know what that does to my property value or how long I'm going to have to hold it, but right now it is unbuildable, unusable. I'm paying for water and sewer that I can't use. And we also believe that with the size of the commercial property that's on Pine Island Road, that multifamily makes a nice buffer for the people across the street that have already built nice houses. And there's already a 6-unit in the middle of this block. We just think it's the best use because it's a good buffer and it solves everyone's problems. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a public meeting. Do any other members of the audience have any comment? Please step to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Good morning. My name is Bertha Gonzalez. I live at 4016 Southwest 17th Avenue, and I own the little apartment building at 636 Northeast 4th Terrace. I've owned that building for more than 15 years, and throughout all the time, this has been the issue. The issue is always the zoning, and every time I'm going to, for an appraisal, always the appraisals comes up lower because of this issue. For my mortgages, every time I've refinanced, recently I had that issue that it had to come to the city. It took over one more month than the the loan was supposed to, instead of taking like 30 days, it took like over 60 days. And also my insurance is higher because of this. And it's, if I want to sell it one day, it is a cloud. It is definitely something that always comes up, this zoning problem. I just wanted to state that. Thank you.
Do any other members of the public have a comment? Seeing none, I'll turn it back to the commission.
Chairman Marker and Planning and Zoning Commission members, Robert Peterson, Planning Manager for the city. Staff's going to give, Chad's going to give a little more detailed response, but I feel compelled today to rebut a little bit of what Mr. Slaughter said. We're talking about a policy document, the comprehensive plan, and that language can be reasonably interpreted and discussed and debated by reasonable minds in a number of different ways. And the fact that Mr. Slaughter and his client disagree with Chad's analysis does not equate to an error on Chad's part in what he's put into his staff report. And I think the statement that there are serious material defects in our planning process and regulations is quite a bit of hyperbole there. This applicant could easily have also asked for a rezone to commercial corridor, which is consistent with the PIRD, and the property owners could go forward with development options. So we realize their request, but Chad's evaluated that. He can give you some more background and details, but we don't think that equates to errors or serious material defects in our process. Thank you.
Hi, good morning.
At this time, we're open to member comments. Does any members of the commission have any comments? Ferretti?
My thought was that if this is a matter of the difference between the future land use and the zoning, how come you didn't just go forward with an R1 or a single family for the properties for an amendment to the land use, which would then simply put the properties in the proper zoning as the zoning in the future land use that would then be compatible? Yes. Mr. Slaughter, sorry.
Thank you again for the record, Tom Slaughter. Good question. That was when I indicated that there's really three alternatives. One, as Mr. Pedersen said, go forward with the commercial corridor. Two, go forward with a single family. In this case, when we did a pre-application, that was something that staff just simply indicated was probably a non-starter to bringing it back down. And part of the reason for that is we probably have got about over 40,000 we're at about 40% vacancy, just a little less. We have a lot of residential single family. We just didn't believe adding to that mix would be necessary, but it does provide a minimal use though.
Well, that would also then put the properties in their, what I would consider their proper use category, and remove some of the issues, some of the concerns of the property owners as far as mortgages, title issues, and any potential violations.
Well, that was our hope. Right now, again, I don't believe my criticism of staff was in any shape or form personal, but when we go through the criteria and evaluate that, reasonable people can disagree, but in this particular regards, they haven't spoken to you about the most basic fundamental problem is, can those developers, can they go pull a permit right now? No. And again, as Mr. Pedersen said, they would be required to get that commercial corridor, and then you got to go find a buyer to go develop an 80 by 125 commercial lot, or you have to start assembling them together, which, as I've indicated, is very difficult. It takes time.
Thank you.
Let me kind of add on to that just a little bit in terms of assemblage. We just saw a land use case in the last case where you had assemblage occur of properties over time. And you saw where it was a single family residential lot, you had someone acquire multiple properties, you assembled across a canal. So while we understand that it is difficult, it is not impossible for that assemblage to occur. And then the last point that we wanted to make is that the designation of these properties has been Pineland Road District since 2002. So now we're in year 2022. So first of all, that PIRD designation has existed for a long time. The applicants were free at any moment to come in and apply for a rezone that would have made their properties whole. That has not occurred within 20 years. And then lastly, even one of the speakers spoke that she purchased the property 15 years ago. Well, she purchased it with that dichotomy of the Pineland Road District, future land use designation, and that single-family zoning. Staff understands that it complicates things and makes matters tricky, but if you go into an agreement knowing that you have an issue there, then, I mean, there is some onus on the owners to correct that issue or meet with staff to perhaps see if we can do a rezone on our own where we can take the entire strip of land there to that commercial corridor or what was previously the corridor zoning district.
Moving forward, any commissioners that have a comment to make, please direct it either towards the city or to the applicant so that we can streamline here. Commissioner O'Connor.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for the city. Why was that area not initially included in the corridor zoning district? Because of the platted aspect of it?
You know, I mean, it was done in 2002. You know, the most logical thing to do would have been to rezone that to corridor. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't on staff back then. We have done numerous proceedings, you know, rezones, future land use amendments, where we have taken those inconsistencies throughout the city and tried to correct them one way or the other where we felt it was appropriate. You know, we've been doing this on thousands of acres, and I don't have a good answer why we haven't done that yet. When we did the rezone in 2019 from residential development to R1, that was a cleanup aspect because we were getting rid of the residential development zoning district. We had to change it to something. At that time, it probably would have been in our best interest to rezone that to commercial corridor. Like I said, we were dealing with thousands of acres. And, you know, sometimes unless you get a number of people that come forward to you and say, hey, we've got a problem here, you know, sometimes it just gets missed, and then we will try to go and fix it later on when that problem comes to light. So I don't have a good answer why it wasn't originally done to corridor back then. And I don't necessarily think that it was because of the pre-platted nature. You had 10,000 square foot lots all over the place that were changed over to corridor back then. So,
Yeah, the reason I ask is that road that it sits on, and I'm trying to find out exactly, here we go. Is that northeast Fourth Terrace?
Correct.
Seems like a good dividing space for.
And that's probably why the PIRD was put there. I think when they looked at, this is more anecdotal than anything, when they looked at where they were putting the Pineland Road District, they had sort of a distance requirement from the roadway outwards, unless there was larger parcels, like if you see to the west, you have those longer parcels. Obviously, you're not going to split those in half with the designation. So they had sort of a distance requirement where they did probably a quarter mile or half a mile out from the right-of-way of Pineland Road. But we agree that that local road does make sort of like a nice logical split of where the land use and the zoning changes.
So could have been, should have been, would have been is out of the question now. So going forward, though, I believe that the current property owners are being, you know, they can't do anything with the land. And the land to the south, somebody mentioned it is owned by an automotive group, and it is commercial property, Pine Island Road. And so I would think that a buffer of multifamily would be a logical spot right on the affected parcels leading into single family across the street. So I'm going to vote for this ordinance to be approved. Thank you.
Commissioner Apkin.
Yes. You know, anytime we look at the land use we look at today, tomorrow, and in the future. It's a big jigsaw puzzle that we have here in Cape Coral. I mean, our need for commercial properties, commercial, professional, whatever, is great. I think that when we look at this right now, I would rather see this as a commercial corridor so we can keep that property available. And if the owners want to do that, I think would make more sense now with what we have. The problem I have is when we look at things here, you know, there's a lot of land around here that's already zoned multifamily. And if we keep changing what we have in areas, especially with that corridor we have on Pine Island, you know, we're looking at the same thing on Burnt Store and that area down there. I mean, we only have so much property left, but the rate of growth that we have to have so much property for the commercial, professional, commercial use, or we're not going to be able to provide the services that are required as the population grows. So in my estimation, I would vote against this particular situation. Thank you.
Any other comments from the commission? I think this is an important case that puts private property rights against common good and looking forward way into the distant future and how we weigh those items. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this with the large land use changes that we saw in 2019. So it's important that we make the right decision here. With that said, there is a good position that these property owners have been put into a place where they are going to have less of a bargaining position when indeed, if, as you hope, the property is assembled, if they can only go to single family or if they're even restricted from doing that. With that said, I will be voting for this motion. And are there any motions on this?
I make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve by Commissioner O'Connor and a second by Sommers. Recommending approval of Ordinance 62-22.
Nay.
Aye.
O'Connor,
Aye.
Safranik,
Nay.
Summers.
Aye.
Fioretti,
Nay.
York.
Nay.
3 ayes, 4 nays. Motion failed.
At this point, I'll hand the gavel back to Chair Reed.
Ordinance 4-22, an ordinance amending the City of Cape Coral Land Development Code by amending Article 1, General Provisions, Section 1.15, Measurements regarding density and intensity calculations, providing severability and an effective date.
Thank you. Mr. Pedersen?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Planning and Zoning Commission members. Again, Robert Peterson, Planning Manager for the city. This is a text amendment, and this is one where I didn't feel a slideshow is necessarily the best way to describe this. There are many situations, particularly in developing communities that are not pre-platted, as development moves out into the undeveloped areas, the agricultural areas, the more rural areas of either surrounding a city or a county. The result of that development will be the need to widen roadways to provide for increased right-of-way, for future development, turn lanes, signalizations, and all those sorts of things. We don't have that very often in Cape Coral. But what we have discovered through an applicant that brought this issue to our attention is that there's a situation, typically when a municipality or a government is acquiring right-of-way, they try and negotiate for the purchase of that right-of-way, and if they can't come to a mutual agreement, they exercise eminent domain, and they take that property, and then if it's the court approves the taking, then it's a matter of what the compensation is, and title to that land and would pass to the municipality or the condemning authority for right-of-way purposes, for example, to widen the roadway. In this instance, we had an applicant that did not wish to drag out an eminent domain proceeding, There's some property along Burnt Store Road. There's a specific example, but this isn't unique to this one property. I'll just tell you this to illustrate the story. And the county is acquiring an easement for right-of-way purposes along the edge of this property. And rather than go through an eminent domain proceedings and get tied up in the value and the time it takes to do that, even under the fast take process, they simply desired a process to, if we give this right away, if we donate this right away to the county without compensation, we'd like to remain whole with that strip of land, that land area of that land, for calculating the maximum allowable density or intensity on our site. So if you had an acre and you were giving up 10,000 square feet, donating it, and then you weren't being compensated for it, the effect of this ordinance would allow you to count that 10,000 square feet as a part of your density calculation for residential or your intensity calculation for a non-residential development. This is common practice in a number of jurisdictions. As some of you know, I worked in Manatee County for 13 years. This was routinely done, that any right-of-way that's donated like that, the property owners kept whole for purposes of density. I worked in a couple other jurisdictions where this is also the norm. When that right-of-way is given up, that property owner is kept whole in the density and intensity process. So this ordinance would allow that same process in the city of Cape Coral. They can't have been compensated for it. It can't be post-development. Some years later, come back and try and look for this. It's when it's raw land, they're hoping to develop it, but they want to keep that density, intensity whole. That's it.
This is a public hearing. Does anyone from the public wish to speak? Seeing none, back to the commission. Commissioners, discussions? Commissioner Ferreira?
Excuse me. So this would apply only to pre-development in calculation. Once the property is developed, that would no longer apply. How does it, I'm not sure.
That is correct, sir.
Okay. And if it was an existing developed property, how would that apply?
Would not apply.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Motions?
Second?
We have a motion by Commissioner Summers, second by Commissioner O'Connor for approval. Madam City Clerk, please call the vote.
Yes, Chair. Apking?
Aye.
Marker? Aye. O'Connor?
Aye.
Reed?
Aye.
Safranek?
Aye.
Summers?
Aye.
Fioretti?
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Would the city attorney please call ordinance 7-22?
Ordinance 7-22, an ordinance amending the City of Cape Coral Land Development Code by amending Article 2, Chapter 2, Section 2.2.3, exercise of power, powers and duties regarding the powers and duties of the hearing examiner, by amending Article 3, Chapter 1, Section 3.1.3, development approval process, Table 3.1.3, regarding the decision-making authority for appeals of administrative decisions, and by amending Article 3, Chapter 1, Section 3.1.14, appeals regarding the decision-making authority for appeals, providing severability and an effective date.
Thank you.
Morning again, Mr. Chairman. Robert Peterson for staff. This amendment to the code is another text amendment. Going back a little bit historically, for at least one or two of you, you'll recall that the Planning and Zoning Commission used to hear quasi-judicial matters before their hearing examiner system was established in about 2016, 2015 in the city of Cape Coral. When the Land Development Code was updated in 2019, the regulations were changed to provide that if you are aggrieved by a decision of staff on the code, you can appeal it to the director, and then after the director's final decision, you could appeal that first to the hearing examiner and then to the the city council. And as under our system, under the charter, the city council is the final decision-making authority arbiter with respect to the Land Development Code in the city of Cape Coral. This amendment removes that intermediate step. So from a staff decision, when that's finalized, someone wishing to appeal that appeal would go to council for hearing and action. It would not have to pause at the hearing examiner. That adds time and expense, and time being money. That also slows down the process if there is going to be an appeal over something. Secondly, the code has never been clear as to what happened to an administrative appeals and other aspects under the Land Development Code. For example, the city has a published adopted set of engineering design standards. They establish things like the maximum width of your curb cut, driveway standards, all the technical standards of developing a site, the slope and grade of roads, and all those types of things. That document, as amended over time, has really not substantially changed for many, many years. And the document is not clear whatsoever as to how you vary or what you do if there's a disagreement between, say, a client and his engineer and the engineers in our Public Works Department over the site development requirements. So again, because the engineering design standards are incorporated by reference and are therefore part of our Land Development Code, the same appeal process applies for decisions under the engineering design standards. So that's the second thrust of this amendment. It makes it clear that administrative decisions of the Public Works Director on the engineering design standards, that appeal would also go to council rather than a hearing examiner.
Is that it?
That's it.
This is a public hearing. Does anyone wish to speak from the public on this matter? Seeing none, back to the commission. Commissioners.
Motion to approve?
A motion for approval
Ordinance.
by Commissioner O'Connor.
Second.
I'm sorry. Apking was the second. And a second by Commissioner Apking. Madam City Clerk, please call the vote.
Yes, Chair. Apking,
Aye.
Marker, O'Connor,
Aye.
Reed,
Aye.
Safranik,
Aye.
Summers. Aye. Fioretti.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carried.
Thank you. Let's see, I'll open the meeting to citizens' input. Does anyone from the public wish to speak on any matter? Seeing none, close citizens' input. Any staff updates?
Morning again, Mr. Chairman. No specific discussion or presentation for you this morning. I did want to make you aware that the city has been moving forward with implementation and now training for a new software system that'll track our permitting and those processes. It's called InterGov, and we're hopeful to be able to have that system go live at the last week of February. And so I just wanted to give you an update on that. We continue to work forward with that. If you have any questions about the details of that, please get a hold of us and we can talk further.
So that eliminates E-Track?
It will replace the E-Tracket system, that is correct.
Got to learn something new now. Okay.
Technology. I do have, I just want to give you all a heads up. I'm doing some research regarding the reading of the titles. Really, the only requirement of reading of the titles is for the governing body, not so much here. You know, we started the hearing examiner, there's no titles being read there. I can still do it. Everybody that's here, I'm sure love to hear my voice, but there's no mandate by the statutes. I've checked the Attorney General opinions. There hasn't been anything in the Attorney General opinions. I'm still going to check some case law. I doubt there's anything out there. So I'll probably just send a memo out between now and the February meeting. And what I'll probably propose is just that the chair says, you know, Ordinance 1-22, then it goes right to the city. Goes right to the city. And that's what the hearing examiner does, and that's what most of the other planning and zoning commissions do in other jurisdictions. So.
And it's advertised in the newspaper,
Right,
and we
it's
can read
advertised in the
it. And
newspaper, everybody gets their letter if
Right.
they're within 500 feet, as you can tell with the people that were here today. They said they lived within 500 feet, so that particular person probably got his letter, and the other ones were here because they own the property, so.
Right. I don't have a problem
Yeah,
with it.
I know it, it's just, for the 23 years I've been here, we've been doing it, and talking to Dolores when she was doing it, actually the chair read it for a
Right.
couple of years.
For Waco.
Yeah, for a while, they would do it, and for a while, the clerk read it. But there's really no legal requirement to do it. I think it was when the court started looking at quasi-judicial matters, and they started doing the titles, that when this board was making decisions regarding special exceptions and so on and so forth, that's when we really started reading them, but we're not doing that now. And those were resolutions, and there's no requirement for resolution titles to be heard, so.
Yeah,
So
I'm
anyway,
okay with it.
just trying to streamline it a little bit. I mean, as you remember, I mean, there was times where there was 3 pages of titles, and, you know,
Right.
people would be talking, and didn't offend me, but, you know, it was like, okay, I'd go through 3 pages in
We
10
had 30
minutes.
or 40 cases.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. I don't have a problem with it. It's fine with
So
me.
anyway, I'll just send out a quick memo if I don't find anything.
Okay. Let's see, under member comments, we have 4 members and 2 alternate applications that are coming due. You have to have your applications in by the 21st of this month if you're planning on to continue with your seat. So I've already applied. Let's see, and they'll all be heard on February 16th, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So get them in by the 22nd to be able to get heard on the 16th, or if you don't put it in, then your seat's open to the public too. So,
They'll be
and I'm
coming,
sure there'll be a lot of applicants.
they'll be coming before the commission first on
Right.
the second.
Do you have applicants now? How many do you have?
I can verify.
Well, it's not that important.
We do.
Great. Any other member comments? Date and time of our next meeting is February 2nd, Wednesday, 2022. Hereby adjourned.